That's an extremely good question. If you look at the way that technology has developed since Blue Prism started in 2002, it started very much as a process-driven, task-oriented technology. Think of it like, it was described disparagingly as macros on steroids. But what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years is the skills built into the robots becoming more and more intelligent. And I use that word advisedly because RPA still deals with structured data, the rules-based activities that organizations want within their companies. So where do I see this going? So I think that robots are learning new skills. So the AI elements that are being built into the platforms will allow organizations and are allowing organizations to automate more of their processes. Why? Because they can deal with the semi and unstructured data. What that means is that organizations will build more and more robots across more and more of their organizations. So let's take an example. Admiral Insurance, which is a UK-based insurance business, have a headquarters in Cardiff in Wales. And their headquarters is 12 floors, 12 stories. They started 20 months ago with one UiPath robot, one license. Now they have robots in every single one of their departments, with the exception of the canteen, funnily enough. So I don't think even we can automate that. So within that organization, it covers the back office, corporate functions, finance and accounting, procurement, HR, into the industry-specific processing functions like claims processing, first notice of loss, and into the customer service, customer experience areas with the attended robots. So what we're seeing is that there is no limit to where automation can spread within organizations. The problem is that most organizations that go into automation go into it for the wrong reason. They go into it because they want to reduce headcount. They want to reduce cost. But what they find when they do it is that the value of their people, the value of their human capital is actually much higher than they thought it was. And so they're not getting rid of the people that they've automated the tasks or the processes. What they're doing is moving those people up the value chain because they can. So ultimately, I think we are now moving to a stage where everybody in business will have their own robot to do what I lovingly call the shitty, crappy stuff that no one wants to do, that they have to do their job, and to help them to do the stuff that they do want to do. And we're actually doing a study at the moment with Forrester, which will be published in a couple of weeks, which has a direct link between employee engagement, facilitated by RPA, and improved customer experience. And that proof point means that organizations will then spread it throughout their organizations. Ultimately, I think automation and AI will disappear. And it won't disappear because it's not going to get used. It will disappear because it will be used everywhere. Andrew Ng of Stanford University has described AI as the new electricity. And unless you're an eco-mentalist, no one cares how the electricity is generated, as long as when you turn on the switch, the light comes on. This will be RPA and automation and AI within organizations in the next 5 to 10 years. What we're finding is that our go-to-market is threefold. So there's the community, it's the people who are actually building and running the robots. There's our partners like T-Impact that are actually facilitating their clients, your clients, on the digital transformation journey. And then there's the technology vendors who want to bake their technology into our platform because we're growing so fast. So that three-pronged approach gives us a very good insight as to the way the market's developing. And what we find is the most successful customers who are implementing automation, put it as part of their digital transformation journey. I mean, there's a reason that Uber and Amazon have become verbs. No one wants to get Ubered, so everyone is on that digital transformation journey. RPA is a really good first step for that because it's relatively quick, it's relatively cheap compared with big IT projects, and the returns on investment are really good. So that's why most organizations start with RPA. The final point is that as you move forward and as you move into spreading it out throughout the organization, you need several things. One is you need a center of excellence, or indeed a managed service, so that those robots are being provided to you either by your internal team or by a managed service provider, so that you can scale much more quickly. Secondly, you need the organization to have the support of IT. Time after time after time. The business have seen RPA as a way to avoid or sidestep IT, and that has always been a mistake. So you need to include IT from day one. And if you think about it from a geography perspective, RPA and AI isn't necessarily a technology solution. What it is a change agent. It's a way that organizations restructure themselves using automation as opposed to people in order to do that. So we have 55% of the global 500, Fortune 500 organizations as customers. But it's lumpy, so we've got 35% in the US, 35% in UK, 40% in France, 50% in Germany, and 80% in Japan. And the reason for those differences in terms of geography are nothing to do with technology, but it's the way that those societies are based and the changes that are taking place within that at a society level that is actually dictating how much automation is being included and how fast. So if you look at the legal market, the Jackson reforms, the SRA, the requirements driven by changes in the regulatory framework under which they operate has necessitated a change in the way and the accountability that lawyers are now face. What that's driving is a couple of things. One is in terms of KYC and which know your customer, anti-money laundering, GDPR regulations. There are some requirements that need to be done in order to meet those requirements, and they're becoming more and more onerous every day. I mean, 40% of our business comes from financial services organisations, banks and insurance companies and so on. They've been hit with this in exactly the same way that law firms have. 40% of our business comes from those organisations. A very small percentage of our business currently comes from law firms. Why would that be? And I think it's because of the conservative nature of the way that law firms have been set up. They're still basically run as partnerships. So you can approach a managing partner of a law firm and suggest a good idea to them, but they still need to sell that internally. The best analogy I've come up with is, given the reforms and the Legal Services Act, I think what's going to happen is that we're going to see an increase in the amount of M&A activity, mergers and acquisitions activity, through and between law firms in multiple countries. So the white shoes are going to buy the magic circle and vice versa. That creates a nightmare of differing systems, different working practices. What a friend of mine describes as process sediment that's been built up over eons that you need to get through. RPA is a really good way of cleansing that data, and a good example of that is with Ashton and what you've done in UiPath with Ashton. But also we're expecting to see that M&A activity lead to new alternative revenue generation. So think about 30 years, the audit-based organizations, the accountants, were in exactly the same position then as law firms are now. So what I'm expecting to see is that law firms produce new services. They have to, because the factory law firms have been set up, so you can have Sainsbury's law firm or Tesco law firm, and those factory type activities and the wills and several other activities that are just rote will not be done by the specialist law firms. So they have to find new ways of generating revenue. So what I'm expecting to happen is that the law firms will move into business services. They'll move into consulting in the same way that the audit companies did 20, 30 years ago. Again, a really good question. If you look at law firms just as an industry, the largest organizations aren't necessarily the ones that go first, because they tend to be fairly conservative by their nature. It's the smaller, more nimble, more agile organizations that tend to lead the charge on innovation. And that increases the value of their shareholder value. If they're floated, which a lot of law firms aren't, or the value to the individual partners in that partnership organization. So if you are looking to set yourself up to be acquired by one of the big companies, a really good way of doing that is A, increasing your efficiency, B, increasing your revenue, and C, increasing the value of your business. Using RPA, particularly in a managed service basis, where you can buy that service as a monthly charge, is a very good way of achieving the innovation and development that you're looking for without having to spend gazillions of pounds doing it. So I think the smaller organisations are actually in a better position sometimes than those large, more monolithic organisations. When you look at why organisations went into RPA, and you look at what organisations have done over the last 2 or 3 years, which is when we've seen a real acceleration in the adoption of RPA, every organisation goes into automation for the same reason. Job cuts, cost reductions. All of them are wrong. Genuinely wrong. Because what actually happens is when you put automation into the organisation, organisations find that the value of their people is actually much higher than they thought it was. The way I describe it is, just because someone's doing a monkey job doesn't mean they're monkeys. So the value of that person within the organisation and the happiness that they demonstrate within their job is increased as a direct result of putting in automation. Because it takes away the stuff, the mundane, boring work that they have to do in order to do their job. So I'll give you a good example. An organisation called Generali is one of the big insurance companies, headquartered out of Italy. It's an 80 billion euro business. Their Irish business automated as many of their processes as they could. The chief executive of that company is a chap called Carl Nolan, and he came up with a brilliant quote. He said, since we put in automation, the mood music of our business has changed. We have happier employees, and we now measure our service in terms of compliments rather than complaints. That has nothing to do with technology. That is a difference in mindset. If you think back to the firsts, you're thinking internet first, then cloud first, and then mobile first. We think we are now entering a world of automation first. That should not be feared, that should be welcomed, because it actually helps people be happier in what they do on a day-to-day basis. Most people go into automation starting with finance, their finance and accounting operation. The reason for that is there's a fairly set way of doing accounts payable and accounts receivable and order to cash and so on, because that's been built up by shared service and outsourcing companies and individually within organisations through Lean Six Sigma over the last 20 to 30 years. So it's a really good place to start because it's easily manageable, and most finance organisations still run themselves in Excel. So facilitating automation within those organisations is much easier. When we look at it per geography, it varies because different geographies operate in different ways. So let's take a burning platform type activity and geography. Japan is a really good example of that. So in Japan, the population peaked in 2010. Plus all the baby boomers are now retiring, which means the amount of work that people do in Japan is becoming dangerous levels. The average Japanese worker works 60 hours a week. The Japanese government define dangerous levels of overwork as more than 106 hours a week. There is a word in Japanese called koashi, which means to work oneself to death, and people do. So there is no choice. They have to automate, which is why UiPath has a penetration rate of 80% of Fortune 500 companies based in Japan are you already using our technology, let alone Blue Prism or automation anywhere. So those organizations have to do it because there is no choice. Over the next 5 to 10 years, every industry and every industrial and post-industrial nation around the world will come across the same problem. There is no choice. This is way of not only increasing the efficiency, enabling you to stay ahead or even stay level with your competitors, but also it's a way of improving the lives of your employees. It's very unusual that you come across technology that is able to do that, and that is what RPA can do.